Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast, where we bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders and influencers who are making headway and some waves in their callings and industries. Today, we are pleased to have Andrew Felton join us. Andrew is a Naval Academy graduate and a former nuclear submarine officer, and he brings a unique perspective to the intersection of faith, ideas, and nutrition. In his thoughtful in his thought-provoking book, Nourished by Design, a Christ-centered approach to nutrition. Driven by personal struggles with anxiety and infertility, Felton embarked on a journey that led him to re-examine nutrition through the eyes of a biblical lens. His work bridges the gap between theological ideas and scientific robustness, offering a holistic approach to food, health, and spiritual well-being. As a devoted husband and father of two, Felton's mission is to equip people with a specialized framework for navigating nutrition and taking responsibility for their own health and wellness. Now, before we roll that intro, I want to thank those who left us 5-star reviews on their favorite podcast players. We do appreciate the interaction and the feedback. Also, we'd like to thank those who have ventured over to buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast and bought us a few cups of coffee this week and last. We do appreciate your support. And there's one other thing, if you could be so kind as to share this with your friends and networks. I know all that interaction helps the algorithms promote 5am podcast to other people as well. I know many are going to enjoy this conversation, so let's roll that intro. Andrew Felton, welcome to the 5am podcast.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to make your acquaintance, and what an interesting topic. How did you come up with this idea to kind of intersect your faith and ideas and then nutrition science?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, a little bit of my background, I was a submarine officer, and that's not necessarily most pertinent to the subject matter at hand. But I was going through a period of some difficulties of my own health issues, and my wife and I both struggling with infertility for a period. And it kind of caused me to rekindle a lukewarm faith, that kind of rediscover my Christian faith. And as I was doing so, I was noticing that, uh, I was also devouring, health and nutrition books at the time. How can I potentially take my own health into my own hands and, you know, make sure that I'm doing everything that I can to support my body and my mind? Um, And so I was reading all these secular health and nutrition books, and they weren't quite squaring up all the time with my Christian faith. And so as I was kind of rediscovering both of those things, it seemed to me that there was a gap in the market. And there are plenty of, they have a whole health and wellness gospel for health and wealth gospel for a reason. There are plenty of health and wellness Christian themed books and resources out there. But I found those two to be quite lacking. And so I wanted to make sure that I was living my faith completely, in not only the spiritual aspects of it, but also the physical bodily aspects. And I found that in my research that there was, I think, a superior way of thinking about health and wellness and nutrition through the lens of Jesus.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I know one of the things you touch on in your book is some of the pioneers in the cereal and breakfast food industry. But one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about is that idea that our body is a temple. Can you get into maybe the motivation or the driving force behind why we should consider healthy eating and what we put into this body or temple, as you've called it?
Yeah, so this is something that comes up in the New Testament, and this is something that's frequently discussed in the kind of Christian health and wellness space. The idea that the body is a temple. That's what the Apostle Paul says in First Corinthians, and numerous other locations in the New Testament. Um, but this really starts with an idea that the body is meaningful, right? That Christ became incarnate. What Christians believe, that Christ is the Son of God, that he is God, and that he became incarnate, took on human flesh, and that because of that, human flesh has meaning, that there's a purpose to our bodily existence, that we're not just spiritual beings that whose, body is meaningless and whose souls are going to just float off into heaven someday. We anticipate a bodily resurrection. And so the idea of the body, the purpose and meaning of the body is significant. And so I go over a whole theology of the body in Nourished by Design. That's actually the foundation of the book. It's the first major chapter. And as I'm doing so, I discuss, the importance of the body, how it ties directly to the person. We're not just souls; we are a body, an embodied soul. So our body is just as important to our personhood as our soul is. And then I talk a little bit about two distinctions about the body: its material and its form. A lot of people talk about, you are what you eat. I think a lot of people have probably heard that phrase. It's probably the most frequently cited nutrition phrase that I can think of. Um, and in a sense, that's true because our bodies are material. They're made out of stuff, the same stuff that is in the dirt and in the bodies of all the other animals. Um, and so that there is a sense in which that's true, but we also have this thing that kind of lives on, and it's our form, something that Leon Cass distinguishes, um, and based on our form, we have a sort of continuity as an individual, even though our stuff turns over daily, right? Every 5 to 7 years, we have new stuff. We're an entirely new person if you just consider our stuff, but we're still the same people. And so thinking about the body in both of these ways helps us to understand what Paul means when he says that we're one body in Christ, that we are all members, the Christian church is all members of one body, and Christ is the head of that body. And then the New Testament also talks about uh, Christ's body being the new temple. The temple in Jerusalem was this architectural marvel of antiquity, and and it separated God from the laity, from the common people. Only the priests could go in there once a year into the holiest place in the temple and have access to God. And so now Christians believe that Jesus' body is the new temple. And if we're a part of that body, if we're in union with him, we too are part of that temple. And so if God cares so much about how his temples were created back in the Old Testament, if you look in Leviticus, there are detailed instructions for how the temple was to be created. How much more does he care about our physical bodies, which are bricks of the enduring temple that's going to exist forever? And so that's kind of that, how I spell that out in the book.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of great information in your book, and absolutely the idea of we are what we eat, and that's kind of, well, that is a Stoic philosophy as well. A lot of the Stoic thinkers also had a lot to say about exercise, physical fitness, and self control, let's say, when it comes to every aspect of life, which includes eating. Can you talk a little bit, maybe from your book or from your research, about that self control or lack thereof?
Yeah, so self-control, I really hit on this in the fasting and feasting section of the book. I have a whole chapter that's devoted towards food rhythms. And one of the things that comes up, um, And this is something that's not necessarily just a Christian idea. Like you said, you know, understanding virtue in relation to our diet has been something that all cultures and many philosophies, including Stoicism, has considered over the years. And I think Christianity is not an exception to that rule. But, among other things, I think the discipline of fasting is perhaps one of the best ways to cultivate discipline in our diets, discipline in all things, but especially in our diets. And I would say that that is specifically um, a potent antidote against the sin of gluttony. In the church, I think there's kind of um, I don't know if it's a joke, but it seems like gluttony has been described as the socially acceptable sin. In our modern culture, I don't think that we consider gluttony to be as deadly uh, a sin as past Christians have, and probably past, peoples of other faiths and cultures. Um, but it really is the all of these people saw uh, our self control as explicitly tied to the way in which we treat food.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to mention that Seneca, one of the Stoic philosophers that I like and appreciate, some of the things he wrote. He said, "By overloading the body with food, you strangle the soul and render it less active." And I'm going somewhere with this, but I'm thinking at the same time as I'm talking, and we've just talked about self-control and gluttony and those kinds of, in Christianity we refer to the fruits of the spirit. So self-control is one of those things, and the Bible actually says against such things there is no law against it. So this self-control and this idea of what we put into our body, it really it affects every other aspect of our life. And I wanted to ask you, I think this is related. It seems in my head that it might be a little off topic, but I want to ask you about the benefits of fasting, because that requires a huge amount of self-control and denying the flesh, which is a major tenet of Christianity.
Yeah, exactly. I think you hit it spot on when you said that that basically what we're putting into our bodies uh, really does have an effect on not only our bodily physical health, but also our spiritual, emotional health. And that a lot of times goes through the body. The body is a vessel through which those things are, played out. The great ascetic monk, Saint Anthony, um, one of the pioneers of Christian fasting and asceticism and monastery life, I guess, as a whole, talked about how fasting and this ascetic disciplines basically were a way to cultivate spiritual discipline through the body, right? And so, back to your question about um, essentially fasting as a whole, like what are the benefits of fasting? How do we fast? Um, I think not only we've already discussed a little bit about how fasting can be used for virtue, but I think there's so many other benefits too. And the funny thing about it is that this is a spiritual discipline that the church has considered to be central throughout even the Old Testament into the New Testament. It was a huge part of daily life, and I feel like it's actually come up most recently in the secular world. It's actually kind of like this biohacker sphere
Yeah,
of
totally.
kind of like the elites in Silicon Valley that you see fasting. And the reason they're doing it is because science is telling us that it's really important to give yourself a break, to give your gut a break. And so some of the actual physical benefits that you see, among others, right? You see this mental clarity that a lot of people describe. That could be attributed to brain-derived nootropic factor, which is a chemical in the brain that your body starts to produce, among other times when you're fasting. Um, There are also numerous benefits on your mitochondrial health, which is this very important cellular component that regulates the cells and creates energy for the cells. Um, your mitochondria help to initiate this cellular autophagy when you're fasting, and so it's kind of like a cellular spring cleaning that rejuvenates dead components, recycles, repairs. This is a necessary process to make sure that your metabolism is in tip-top shape, and so those are just a few of the many kind of physical benefits, and that kind of spill over not only into your bodily health, but also emotional, spiritual health as well.
Yeah. And I would think, as I'm thinking now of the seven deadly sins, of which one is gluttony, it's almost like this whole food and exercise kind of thing. It's like the one proclivity that somebody could have that's really noticeable. I mean, you could. There's an old Chinese proverb that says men are like teacups. When they're bumped, what's inside comes out. So there's certain ways to know. The out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. But when we're looking at someone, we can kind of say, oh, maybe that person lacks a little self discipline, or that person needs to spend some time at on the walking track, or something like that. And I wanted to mention this other quote by Seneca, and it says, no man is good by chance. Virtue is something that must be learned. So, can you talk about our daily habits and what maybe there's some mind renewal, or we have to get rid of some stinking thinking? But can you talk a little bit about that it's not by chance, but it's something that is learned?
Yeah, and just to get back to what you said about how gluttony is kind of a visible, potentially a visible sign for many, and that's totally true. And it could make for some awkward potential conversations if you were to
That's true.
discuss that with somebody. But at the same time, I feel like even people that seem to be in good shape, everyone struggles with gluttony and can experience those feelings and can even be tempted by this, to be gluttonous, and maybe it doesn't show in the same way, but it is a deadly sin for everyone, and so you mentioned that virtue is something that has to be cultivated. I firmly agree with that, and that's why I think that um, we talked about fasting, and fasting is one of those ways to cultivate virtue, self-control in all things. One of the things, another thing that I didn't mention about fasting is that um, it leaves time available when you're not eating all the time. You have time for other things. So maybe you can replace, for some people, it might look like replacing breakfast with reading scripture, or reading, memorizing Bible verses, or reading some other spiritually enriching um, or adopting some other habit. Maybe it's walking, or sitting outside in the sunshine, right? That's one element of fasting that's kind of overlooked, is just the time that it frees up. Um, but I think there's other elements too of cultivating virtue in all things. Uh, I think, I think to gratitude and thanksgiving over food, placing yourself in the proper context as the receiver of this gift that essentially manifests God's self-offering love. I mean, a lot of people don't sit down and think about that, but that's kind of an important concept that really does help to create virtue, and to create the proper frame of mind for thinking about yourself in relation to God.
Interesting. And I guess the creator aspect and our relationship with him. I I wanted to ask you in terms of kind of what we're talking about right now, of kind of saying no to certain things. And it's almost like, I guess, we could view ourselves, or that maybe it's the soul part of us, that the appetites, we could look at them as like a 4-year-old that you never say no to. I mean, fast forward 2 years of a little bit of that. I mean, what's that 6-year-old going to be like? It'll be like taking the terrible twos up into, the other years. So, from what you're saying, I'm kind of picturing this of that fleshly part that always wants it now, right? Like the world's favorite radio station is WIIFM. What's in it for me? So, can you talk a little bit about how, what is there maybe a process to getting ourselves to understand that it's actually okay to not answer this craving in my stomach for food. I'm actually going to be okay if I skip a meal.
Yeah, so there's a lot to that question. One of the things that comes to mind is if you view food in a certain way, if you view food as abundant and satisfying, it really is self-fulfilling, right? So there's this fascinating experiment that I briefly mention in the book because I think it's so compelling that these researchers did an experiment where they had people come in and they had these milkshakes prepared for them, and they gave them two milkshakes. The first one was one that was labeled the indulgent milkshake, and it was said to be some large amount of calories, like 1,000 calories or something. And they said, oh, this is the full cream, like this is the real stuff. And then they also, on a separate occasion, gave them this kind of restrictive milkshake, this like sensible shake is what they called it. And they said, oh, this one's made of like the low cal stuff. This is like 300 calories. Um, and it turns out they were both the same shake, right? Exactly the
Interesting.
same
Okay.
ingredients and everything. And so they measured the hunger hormones of these people after they had both of the shakes. And they found that ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, it's the hormone that's produced in your stomach that tells you it's time to eat. Ghrelin was suppressed after they ate the indulgent shakes, but it was not suppressed at all when they ate the sensible shake. And so what they perceived about their food actually manifested in real life. The people that ate the indulgent shake were full, and the people that ate the sensible shake weren't. And so, what's the lesson from that? Number one, it's that the way that you perceive food, if you think that you're receiving a divine gift, if you think that if you're eating a flavorful diet, if you're not restricting, you're going to feel better about what you just ate, and you're going to feel satisfied. But then that also ties into a broader point that I think it's easier to say no. People say, oh, just say no to that extra, you know, slice of pie or pizza or whatever. It's not easy to do sometimes. I mean, I find myself in that situation a lot, right? Where it's not easy to just say no. Willpower only gets you so far.
It's true.
You actually have to train your body to be able um to not desire that excess, right? To be satisfied. And to do that, you have to actually have a healthy metabolism. And so, we talk about fasting and some of these other disciplines. Um, you can't fast. Somebody who is used to eating for 15 hours a day around the clock, kind of like much of society, I think 80% of society eats 15
Easing.
hours plus per day,
Yeah.
right? If you stop eating for 8 hours, you are going to be having a hard time, right? You're going to be reaching for that Snickers bar because you're going to be a little bit hangry, right? And it's because your body is not capable. Yeah, it feels like an assault on your body because you don't have a constant influx of sugar, right? And so if you start to cultivate these habits over time, where you're eating the right things, you're eating real food, you're not eating processed food, you're not just eating kind of sugary junk, you're not snacking all day, and you start to cultivate a healthy relationship with food, saying no becomes natural, right? It's not like a difficult thing to do. You can skip breakfast, you can go 16 hours, 18 hours without food. And some people feel better. They're like, "Oh, I'm not even hungry." Like, so the easiest way to say no is just to to not be hungry in the first place. And part of that is just cultivating a right relationship with food. And so part of that is through fasting and other disciplines like that. But part of it is through a lot of the other nutritional principles that I display throughout the book.
Yeah. Were there some surprises, maybe from some research that you did? You saw something and the light bulb went on and you were like, oh, I didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, so I'm not, a traditionally trained, medical doctor, nutritionist, anything like that, right? I'm a lay person when it comes to nutrition and to theology in a way, right? Um, and so everything that I did was researching, the most current research, looking to the experts, and I think the biggest thing that I found is I had so many misconceptions. Um, Based on what society tells you about food, based on what, common medical doctrine tells you is the right answer. Um, and we know, I think we're starting to hear some of these things now. Of course, we're starting to hear, okay, fat really isn't that bad for you. They used to say that,
Yes.
it's like the devil, right? Saturated fat's going to it's going to clog your arteries. You're going to have a heart attack. Um, I think everyone's always decided that, sugary stuff isn't the best, but, fat's always been demonized. Protein, I think I learned the importance of protein. I think the modern nutritional recommendations are woefully too low, and a lot of people are told that they have too much protein in the diet, but I think that's absolutely not the case. I think there are some issues with um, even some common minerals that people think, for example, like iron. The work of Morley Robbins is very fascinating, and he is this incredible researcher who has really kind of uncovered in recent years. This is something that, was throughout the 20th century. There was plenty of research on this, but he kind of uncovered that we're eating way too much iron. And most people hear the exact opposite of that. You're not having enough iron, you're anemic. Um,
Yeah.
and so that was a big one that I kind of had to really learn about, understand, apply. And it all makes sense when you think of it in a framework that's based on the Bible doesn't have any precise, rules for nutrition, but when you think about it in a different way, when you think about the kind of the foundations that are revealed in Christ, and then you start to think of these things, it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And so we can talk about some of those things or not, but there were quite a few things that I really uncovered that were
Interesting.
fascinating.
Wow. So, audience might as well look to the fourth wall, as it were, and ask you to leave something in the comments for Andrew or myself. And what's your thoughts on this food and the demands of the body versus the demands of the mind? We'd love your feedback and interaction. So, while we're kind of talking with our audience, Andrew, is there a way that people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I think the best way to interact with my work, especially, would be to go to Amazon and check out Nourished by Design, a Christ-centered approach to nutrition. That is my book, and I have an author page there as well. And that'll be the best way to interact with the work. I can also put up my Instagram as well, and people can reach out to me that way too.
Nice. So have you like and I had an advanced I do have an advanced copy of the book that I've been working my way through, and uh I was going to ask you, in what ways does your book challenge maybe mainstream environmentalism and conservative Christianity in that approach to food and health?
Yeah, so it does challenge both of those.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about the environmentalism especially because, and this is something that I really, you hear a lot of things in the mainstream public opinion, especially about food production and the environment, about, meat especially, right? There's a reason that Bill Gates is buying up half of America's farmland and trying to, um, you know, grow corn and feed us veggie burgers.
Yeah, right.
And it's because there's this perception that meat, for example, is just this horrible thing for the environment. That cow burps are
Right.
creating, adding all this methane to the atmosphere, and that methane is, of course, a greenhouse gas, and it's a potent greenhouse gas, and so that's causing issues. And I had to do kind of a 180 on this when I really read the research. It turns out that I think that it's the exact opposite now as a result of that, and it's that I think that animals are uniquely capable of actually helping to combat any sort of climate crisis that we have in terms of emissions, and that they do so by creating robust soil. Soil is made of carbon, of course, and because of that, it's by depleting the topsoil actually that we're releasing so much of this carbon into the atmosphere. Cows are uniquely capable of putting that carbon back in the atmosphere. And so, uh, it's kind of fascinating how just looking at God's design of this carbon cycle, right? He designed it so that herbivores, large herbivores like cows, would eat grass, which is a perennial plant and stores its nutrients underground. They would burp this greenhouse gas into the atmosphere that lives there for 10 years or so before it gets rained back down, creates new grass. And this whole cycle is being perpetuated as the cows are adding nutrients into the soil with their manure. So essentially they're adding no net carbon into the atmosphere, and they're putting it away underground. So that's something that you just don't hear a whole lot of. And when we start to talk about regenerative agriculture, this kind of this buzzword that's starting to kind of have its heyday in the last few years. And this is exactly why, eating meat, especially uh, large ruminants like cattle, is really an important way, I think, to foster a healthy ecosystem. And I think you mentioned too, like the conservative backlash against that. There's always been this kind of idea that conservatives will kind of like shrug off this and any sort of environmental concerns and things like that. And I think that's true. Um, and I think that we need to kind of reclaim a biblical view of environmental stewardship as a tenant of our responsibility on earth, right? It goes back into that bodily responsibility we have. We're members of creation, and God tells us to be fruitful in that creation for His purposes and for the glory of humanity and God. But He also tells us to care for it, to exercise this thoughtful application of our dominion.
That's right.
And so thoughtful application of our dominion to me means following God's designs, which means following his cycles in nature.
Yeah, and certainly we want to be good stewards. Of course, coming from a Christian perspective, we both know the verse that says, "Study to show thyself approved." And we want that. We want to be good stewards. And certainly, my wife and I live in cattle country. When we go to the mountains, we're surrounded by cows that are on grazing leases. We can't get away from them here. But what I will certainly tell you is, even from my experience growing up for part of my life on a farm, even the microbes, not that I knew this as a child, the microbes that are in the soil benefit from the grazing cattle and other animals. So there really is that cycle of life that's just around grazing animals in the little that I know about it in firsthand experience. And also beef just tastes delicious. And here you can't throw a stick very far without hitting either a cow or a sheep or a horse, which is great. We love that about where we live. And before I get too far off topic, talking about cows and beef and such, um, I did want to ask how you address the topic of nope, just a second, wrong question. There we go. So I wanted to ask you, how does your book address the issue of processed foods and their impact on our health? And maybe is there a biblical viewpoint, looking at the stuff that comes out of the chemical factories, as I like to call them?
Yeah, I think we have to look at process views along a spectrum. People are quick to demonize the word processed, but you know, uh, detractors will point out that even grapes are processed, right? They still get like
Sure.
picked and washed and like packaged and
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? So when you're using that word, I think we have to use it thoughtfully, and instead of just processed, things like fermentation, right? Stuff
Uh-huh.
like that is an application of processing, right? That's taking something that God created and a process that He created, and it's thoughtfully applying that in the processing of that food, right? That's great. I think that's how we're called to. We're called to, not just eat everything raw, straight from the ground, right?
Yeah,
We're
of
called
course.
to. Um, Take the food that is given to us, the raw materials, and participate in that through a thoughtful application of the culinary arts. However, right, when we start to get to ultra processing, and that's kind of the real key word here is ultra processing is doing something that distorts that raw provision. It takes any of the logic, God's love and logic that He was imbuing within that food as something that's good for us and that's going to be compatible with our biology. And it's taking it and it's trying to trick our biology. Things like additives, things like dyes, chemical flavorings, preservatives. They're taking things, um, they're really trying to trick our senses, right? And so that's where the problems come in. Not only in the fact that it kind of throws off our appetite regulation with all the chemicals and with all the sweeteners. Our body doesn't really know what to think when it's eating food that's artificially sweet. It thinks it's about to get a whole lot of energy, and so it starts to flood the body with certain chemicals, and then that doesn't come, and so we remain hungry, right? That's kind of the problem with processing, in addition to the other downstream effects of some of the certain, chemicals like pesticides and the dyes and things that are known to have several detrimental effects, right? And so, uh, yeah, I think it's just the manner of processing. I don't think the Bible tells us anything specifically about how we should view it, but I think that if we're thoughtfully cultivating natural processes and applying, you know, uh, reason to the way that we prepare our food, as
Yes.
opposed to trying to deceptively manipulate people to prop up a packaged food industry that's
Right.
killing, the environment and the people and everything, right? Um, there's a big difference there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask you, as we're getting close to wrapping up, is there a way that your book maybe guides the readers in making practical or day-to-day food choices that would align with wholesome, healthy, and maybe spiritual principles?
Absolutely. So there are a variety of ways. It starts out with a kind of the theological underpinnings, but then really the whole middle chunk of the book is quite practical. And so I do kind of provide an overview of some of the bodily systems, how our metabolism work, how our cells work, um, in relation to the food that we eat, and some of the ways that disease really manifests itself. Really, I think metabolic dysfunction is the primary, is really the root of all disease, and it comes down to some simple mechanisms in our cells and how we treat them, and then ultimately, how can we prioritize the right types of food, the right kind of classes of food. And I don't like to have like a good list and a bad list.
Sure.
I've seen that before, of course. It's not to demonize any types of food, but it's to say, hey, here's the things. I give several classes of categories of things that should be off the diet, and the reason why is because they don't actually reflect the logic of God's designs, right? Simply put, things like refined and excessive concentrated sugars, right? That's not something you see in nature, and especially not when it's divorced from fiber, right? Um, Pesticides. Some of the, people talk about seed oils these days, right? Uh, you know, a lot of those things were used as lubricants for
That's
machines
right.
back in World War II, right? It's not food. It
Yes,
never was intended to be food until you know, use all sorts of high temperatures and pressures and chemicals to get it out of the seeds that they exist in, right? And so, getting rid of those things and then getting rid of some misguided supplements, I talk in depth about these things that you should stop, right? That you should get out of your diet. And then conversely, I talk about the practical types of foods that you can eat. And so, some of the categories that I talk about, focusing on protein. I go in depth about the way that we should look at protein and prioritize it in the diet, accompanying that with fat, just as all natural fats are, they're created by God for us to eat. They taste good and they testify to his goodness for us, right? Um how can we even know what Isaiah is talking about when he's comparing heaven to a feast full of marrow if we don't know what fat tastes like, if we don't know what saturated fat tastes like, right? These are not bad things, and I go over that in depth, some of the misconceptions there.
yeah.
And then,
Oh,
some of the
that's
other
good.
stuff, fiber, fermented foods, right? Things that we should target. So there's definitely plenty of practical
Yeah,
application. There's also a lot of practical application of some of these principles when it comes to food rhythms and fasting, right? Daily intermittent fasting rhythms, weekly, seasonally rhythms, right? The types of foods that how we should be sourcing our foods. There's a lot of practical guidance in here amid a lot of, I guess, philosophical and theological contemplations as
that's
well.
great. Good. Well, it's a well-written book. It's well put together from what I had been going through and reading, and I appreciate that that you took the time to do the research and to actually put this together. And so I'll just do another call to action for our listeners to drop some information in the comments about what your thoughts are. I don't know if you want to be vulnerable enough to share your struggles, but even if you're looking for some assistance on direction to go, definitely let us know. And Andrew, I'm sure would be more than happy enough to connect over time with you as well. And I just need to give you a sincere thanks and just some gratitude for joining me today to talk about this.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a great conversation. I look forward to engaging with the audience, and hopefully everyone picks up the book
That's
and
right.
enjoys it.
Yes, and I definitely will need to have you on again because I thought of some other things. And we just ran out of time. I can't believe we've gone this long. But there's some other things that I guess we're just going to need a round two somewhere down life's path just to talk about a few other things. Yeah, thank you again, Andrew, for joining me today.
Thanks.
Yes. And thank you to our viewers too. We do appreciate you being here and joining in on this conversation. So if you haven't already, please help us grow the channel with a like and a subscribe and a share with your friends because I'm sure there's someone's name who's rolling around in your brain right now. And yeah, absolutely. Send it their way because they will like it. And everyone needs to hear this message in one form or another. And we thank you for your generosity in sharing this with those that you know. And of course, I want to ask you again for a 5-star review on your favorite podcast player. We certainly do like the interaction and the feedback. And thanks to those that have left I know on Apple Podcasts, there's getting to be more and more 5-star reviews. So thank you for those of you that are doing that on the Apple Podcast platform. And I also need to give a sincere, of course, thanks and some gratitude to those that have ventured over to buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast and helped us out with a few cups of coffee. We do appreciate it very much. And so thank you all for your support, for being here, for participating. And until next time, we hope that you seize your day and absolutely enjoy those sunrise and sunsets. I'm Michael Klassen.